Javier, it is wonderful to have you join us. We're going to have a great time. How are you today?
I'm very well. Very hot today in England.
I know
Very
it's one
nice.
of those rare days where we actually have heat in England. And actually, we're very close. We discovered we really could have done this in person because you're
I
literally
know.
probably about 4 miles away from me. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
absolutely, absolutely. We're gonna
Anyway,
go for a walk. I mean, it's just beautiful out there.
it's wonderful, wonderful. So, listen, before we get into the detail, I really want to understand how did you first become interested in culture?
But actually, I studied in IT many years ago. That was my first degree, and then I realized I was being sent. I grew up in Anderson Consulting, then Accenture. I've done my whole career, and I was the guy who was being sent to deal with all the challenges that projects had when they couldn't sort out, people using technology. So I probably was not very good at technology, but I was very good at understanding how people will use them. And then later on, I grew up in that field within the company. I left to do my master's in neurosciences because I wanted to understand how people change behaviors. And then I realized it's not about individual behaviors, it's about collective behaviors. So I went back to uni while I was still working, and I did a part-time PhD in social change to understand how do we get people, in this case employees or patients or citizens, to change the way they do stuff. And that was it. And the title Cultural Architect was, I had a column in The Guardian, and the journalist who's interviewing me for the start of it, he said, well, he's a bit of a cultural architect. And I thought, that's great. That's a great name for what I do because it takes away the fluffiness of culture. A lot of people think that this is about airy-fairy slogans and meetings and lists of mission statements and stuff like that and values, etc. And I was getting to understand it's not about that. That doesn't really work. That there was something that was more of a hard science, like an architectural science, where you build something, you design it, you build it, and you can touch it, you can see a culture show up in a phone call, in a decision. You can find how you can discover cultures when you interact with them quite tangibly as a customers. So that's how I ended up there.
I think that's really interesting that you're saying that it's not about individual behaviors, it's collective behaviors, and it's that culture. And I love the term cultural architect. And I was going to ask you where that came from. So thank you so much for preempting that. That's brilliant. But how do you actually design cultures? Do you do that? Do you do that before the organization begins? How do you do it when an organization already exists? Can you design a culture?
Oh, that's a great question, Maria. Very rarely we design the culture from scratch. Very, very rarely. You rarely have the opportunity to do that because when the companies are very small, they don't have money to spend on culture. They haven't had the challenge yet. So it's mostly fixing an engine while it's running. You can't stop a culture. You can't stop a business and say, "Hey, let's go away for a couple of days and talk about how would we want to be," and then have sort of, a way like town hall meetings announcing the new culture. I want to think of myself and the work that we do as a team as a bit of an antidote to that. I don't think that culture changes because we talk about them. It's like temperature. You can talk about temperature. You and I were talking about how hot it is. It doesn't make a difference. In fact, it makes it worse because now we raise the awareness levels and we feel warmer now. So culture changes very quickly, but it's not through the toolbox that we've been using, probably inherited from the 50s and 60s, the Industrial Revolution even, where culture was more like a process. It's not a process. It doesn't work. I was part of the problem and mea culpa for many, many years of forcing like PowerPoint storytelling around how we would want to be as a company, whatever company it was, telling people how to behave, ignoring that behaviors are outputs. They're not inputs. I can't tell a dog to wag its tail. and even worse, I can't grab a dog's tail and wag it for it. I have to do some things that the dog naturally wags its tail, same as humans. We will pick up the phone and be customer centric, not because I have a manager breathing behind my neck, or I'm being kind of challenged to perform for the next Q, the next quarter, if I want to keep my job or get a bonus. That kind of performance is not what we need in 2021. It did serve a purpose in the 80s, 90s, 2000, but now it doesn't work. It's clearly not working post-pandemic. The motivation levels are just plummeting, and most organizations still keep trying with the old tool set without realizing that that's not how cultures change or how people change behaviors.
That's really fascinating. And I love the fact that you call it's like fixing an engine while it's running. I mean, that not only, I mean, that just conjures up a brilliant image. Also sounds very dangerous to me, but it is exactly, because you obviously don't want the organization to stop. You want the team to carry on, but you need to fix it. I love the pet example, obviously, because I'm a dog person. So thank you you probably chose that just for me. You say cultures change fast, and actually, most people think that culture change takes time. You actually accelerate culture change and can make changes so that it happens like in 3 to 6 months. Can you share some insights in how you do that?
But actually, not only change doesn't take time, but I would go further, Maria. Time is the enemy of change. So if I have somebody, let's say there's a team in the organization who struggles to deal with another team in the organization, sales and compliance or whatever it is. The more time you allow, the stronger the beliefs become, and the deeper, the more ingrained the patterns of behaviors established. The evidence to this, Maria, is that organizations have been doing culture change for decades. And we are in a worse off position today. We're being less customer centric. Now we are dealing with using data and analytics. Again, people buy new computers and they have data, and people are not able to think digitally, to think using data. So time is a funny thing, actually, because that's assuming that humans are, again, a bit like machines or buildings, that you have to wait for the foundations to settle and for the cement to dry before you can build onto the first floor and so forth. That's not how cultures work. Cultures, a better metaphor to understand cultures is, it comes from the world of biology or even virology, or pandemics. To use a more contemporary metaphor, it doesn't take time to get the whole country in lockdown. That didn't take time. The time is quite the enemy of change. So what we do, knowing that, we get an organization into a state of acceleration, and we fast forward all what we call the moments of truth. We rather than talking about culture, we come and get very, very close to the leadership of an organization and to the next levels down, working in the alignment of whatever is away or is working against their culture. And we have to do that in a very short period of time, because that's when you get the tipping point. That's when you get the reinforcing loops that makes everybody else buy into this new way of doing it. So don't announce, cultures don't get announced. You don't need to announce that you're doing a project or an initiative. That is a killer. And however, that doesn't mean that there is no process. There is a process, but it comes from the world of anthropology and biology rather than engineering as people have it.
Okay, all right. You mentioned that people aren't feeling motivated, and even though, as you say, we're working on culture, we're working on our organisations. What are we getting wrong that people aren't feeling motivated at work?
Well, if you look at every single metric of motivation, and this is not related to the current pandemic, but going back in time, since motivation or engagement was measured, started to be measured, the indicators actually have been progressively coming down. So if you look at Gartner or Gallup, any of the indicators show that about 7 to 10% of the global workforce wants to go to work every day, or not even go to work. Nowadays, you don't go to work, you switch into work mode. So that means that most people they're not motivated. Now, what happened over the years, when organizations saw that this was a problem, they started creating mechanisms to engage people. And in that attempt to engage people, rather than engage them in a sense of creating commitment, engage them with a purpose, they created alternative vehicles to make the relationship between an employee and an employer last over time, and to make people work harder. So they created compensation. And compensation, if you think about it as a word, as a concept, it's entirely wrong. What are you compensating me for? That assumes immediately that there is a suffering, there is a damage, there is something that people don't want to do as part of their work. So you compensate them. So, and you have, even you have departments called compensations and benefits, the comp and ben, which is something that my great-grandfather probably started experiencing when work was really hard, and when work was manual labor, and clearly work was uncomfortable. But today, what's happening is that we're seeing cultures, we are able to create cultures where the motivation comes not from what people get, but from what people give. So your time and your talents being put to use for a good use, right? And good use doesn't mean charity. It doesn't mean, it's still a business. You have to be in the business of adding value to a group of clients or patients or citizens or whatever you call it. When you are able to connect in your culture, that the reason why people come to work, whether they're in the front end or back end of an organization, it doesn't matter, with the value that is being created for money, right? Because it's a business, but the value is being created in the lives of customers or citizens or whoever, then you get the right type of motivation coming in. And of course, what people get becomes hygienic. It needs to be there, but it should not be driving the conversation of motivation, because then you get what you get. You get what we have now, after years of trying to keep the right people, and we keep losing people. Organizations are struggling to get the right talent. We're back in the war on talent that we had in the year 2000. And it's even worse now, because millennials have more clarity over the need that I think we all have, but we kind of managed to dampen it. But they are not dampening their need to feel useful, and not useful, Maria, just for the benefit of the team or the boss or a short-term revenue target bonus, career promotion, whatever, or companies' shares performance and making their numbers that year. Is much further than that, is going all the way to the value that we're creating for a part of society. When you can make that connection, and this is no trick hugging, this is the business. So organizations which are in the business of adding value, where profitability and purpose are like two sides of the same coin, they have people who are utterly motivated. If you think about organizations like even charities like Médecins Sans Frontières, they have no issues finding volunteers. And these are doctors who could be making millions of pounds. It could be lots of millions, or hundreds of thousands of pounds working in Harley Street. There are doctors who go into the front line where there is disease, there is damage, there's war, there is suffering, and they use their skills and their time, their talents and their time to make a difference, and their heart kind of grows hugely. They're not worried about their careers, their belly buttons. So when we work with cultures, we do two things. We move people away from their belly buttons, almost like a rubber band. Yes, of course, it's important that we are okay, but the reason why we're coming to work is not because of what we're going to get, but it's because we are going to give something. So getting has to be dealt with, but very quickly move on from the getting into the giving. So we work on that. And then at the same time, we work on the individual leadership at scale for everybody in the organization. So no more top downs, waiting for instructions, tiptoeing with fear of getting it wrong, separating the threat from the challenge, and maintaining high challenge and low threat environments where people thrive, and all the stuff that we keep trying to get: collaboration, innovation, agility, customer centricity. It all emerges organically because you've taken away what has been stopping people from being human beings, which is what, the good news is that we already are, so we don't have to work too hard for that.
Love that. I love the adding value, the giving back, the moving away from that compensation culture. I think that's really good. What I've noticed is that you mentioned millennials. For my generation and for other generations, it was about having our careers first before we were able to give back, because it was our way of being. But millennials want to be giving back and adding value from day one in the workplace, which I think is fantastic, a really wonderful shift in our culture, in our bigger culture, I suppose.
But I would just challenge that, Maria, briefly. I would challenge the giving back. The giving back suggests
You've taken, yes,
a trade, a deal. I'm going beyond that. I'm saying there is
giving
no
without. Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. Yeah.
I think that Maslow messed up, bad time, big time. Maslow got it completely wrong when he told us, and there's a lot of research done on at the time when Maslow became very, very famous. He had very good PR, but he was entirely wrong in that, of course, we need water and food and refuge. Of course, that's unquestionable. But at the top of his pyramid of needs, he put self-actualization. That is the biggest mistake ever. We now know that human beings become much happier. Of course, once you have all the basic stuff sorted, right? When you use who you are to add value, to create value out there, the brain works differently. There's neurochemicals that start to be developed when you give rather than when you get. Getting, cries for dopamine, and dopamine is a very addictive, never-ending call for me, give me. So that's why careers and even giving back, I think we need to stop. We need to stop that and change it with using our talents for good purpose. And what we're going to get has to be sorted out, but it cannot draw too much of the attention in an organization. That should not be the conversation that people are immersed in, because then organizations become clubs with very dissatisfied people and management teams who become desperate and say, oh, how do I keep my talent before losing it? How do I attract people? What's the, talk about the employee value proposition. That is horrendous. Employee value proposition is that you're coming here because through us, you're going to make a big difference in the world. And by the way, we'll pay you well. But that's a conversation that we already had. Let's talk about what's important. Let's talk about how many people are ill who need our medicines. Let's talk about how many people can access their bank data because we're a financial services organization. How people are afraid of losing their houses because we are an insurance company. How people are not able to to work from home because we are an IT or a software development company or telecommunication company. That is the conversation that needs to be driven inside the cultures of 2021.
Much more powerful conversations. Thank you for correcting me on that. That is really powerful, and I can see how by driving those conversations, you are become so much more customer centric. That you have much more engagement. You would have much more. I can see how that would all bring those excellent, reactions and results. You've worked for a huge variety of organisations. In the introduction, I talked about Google and Airbnb, but Mines and the Royal Household, which obviously piqued my interest. Can you tell us a little bit about what they have in common, because they are so diverse?
Actually, humans are humans, right? And there are a lot of things that we humans have in common. Of course, there is a layer of culture that is very time sensitive and location sensitive and context sensitive. So clearly, when we were at the beginning of last year in Mozambique, inside a mine with 10,000 miners in what is probably like a village or a small town, there is a layer of what they talk about, that is very different from the conversations inside the royal household, of course, or Swiss Re in Switzerland, or I don't know, a prison in Uruguay. What is common is that what drives human beings is pretty predictable. Now, of course, you'll say, well, a trader in Canary Wharf will be driven by something different from a nurse here in Guildford, and that is true. They are immersed in a different conversation, but the psychological mechanisms and the sociological mechanisms are very similar. So the tools that we use to understand culture and then turn it, adjust it, are exactly the same tools. So of course, when you have a hammer, you can hammer different kinds of nails, big nails, small nails, whatever. The act of hammering continues to be the same, right? So as an example, Maria, before we start any projects, we do a few weeks of ethnography. Ethnography comes from the world of anthropology. We go and live with the environment that we want to change, right? So I've been a trader, good luck on me. I've been a policeman on the back of a police car in Northern Ireland, this many years ago. I've been a rubbish collector in Latin America. I've been an actuary in an insurance company in Switzerland. Meaning I hang out with them while they were doing the work without telling them that I was a culture architect trying to understand how they do. So, because one thing is what people say or what they do, which is what we normally get to, when you ask questions. But a very different thing is when you get to doing ethnography, which is understanding why they say what they say and why they do what they do. That people won't tell you that. You have to hang out with them and hear the conversations, pick on the conversations that they're having while they are being distracted, or when they're dealing with a customer, or when they're having coffee at the cafeteria. So we understand the culture differently. So no surveys. I think surveys are an actually part of the problem. Every time you measure engagement, you measure culture, you are doing a couple of things. One is you're getting people to rehearse everything that bothers them. So it's like an opportunity to moan, and that doesn't help, because actually that strengthens the memories of what's wrong and tends to label things that could have been just one off or two offs, and they become a pattern and they become now a label, and it becomes harder to change But the second thing, it creates a false promise. So if I ask you, Maria, right now, how hot are you? And you'll probably tell me, yeah, I'm at 7.5 or whatever, and I get an average because it's a hot day. Then, and I take note of that, and I thank you for participating in this survey. Now, not only are you feeling now hotter because I make you think about your heat, but also I can't do anything about it. It's, I don't sell air conditioners. I can't even open the window for you. It's part of the context. It's very difficult to change. So in a way, our relationship is somehow challenged because you told me that in business that you needed more clarity on the mission, on the direction of the company, or you wanted, you feel that you're not being paid enough, and things that, by the way, I already knew if I was very connected with the workforce anyway. So things that, I'm not saying that we should ignore those things. I'm thinking we should know them by being there. Is much more powerful. And then not only you know what people say or do, but you understand why they say what they say and do what they do. And therefore, you have access to starting to change the culture. And the tools that we apply then on our second phase of our work is understanding where are those beliefs, what are the hooks where these beliefs are hanging from. And this is what we created, this methodology called the moments of truth, where we very quickly help the organization adjust all these moments of truth in record time, so that without announcing a change of culture, the conversation that people were immersed in very naturally and organically and quickly, literally 3 months to 6 months maximum, it changes. And people forgot about the conversation they had 6 months ago. So that's essentially how actually it works, how we manage to make it work.
I've written a ton of notes there. I'm imagining anybody listening to this will be making all sorts of notes. And it's reminded me actually of the mistakes I've made when I've led organizations, and even the mistakes I've made actually when I was a management consultant. So that's really fascinating stuff. So a lot of reflections for me. But here's what I don't understand. I can see how you can do that in an organization. I can see how you can do that for a company. But you also do this for cities and even countries. How can you do that when there isn't one particular place to go to, when everybody's dispersed in a country, for example?
Well, that is, after years of helping big brands get the cultures that they need to so that their strategies can work, I became more interested in cities, because once you're in this field, you like it when it's broken. You like it when people have already tried a few things and they are blaming each other. They're blaming the consultants who've done the report. They're blaming the former head of HR or the CEO or whatever. And they're restarting, and I love it. I love that. And in cities, it's a lot more complex, but the methodology is very similar. So we need to understand by being citizens, or by being hanging out in the city, what are the constructs, what are the mental models that people have that actually are driving the behaviors that need to change. And then what changes is that the moments of truth that we operate through are different from, in cities or countries, are different from the ones that we find in organizations. So in an organization, you have an onboarding, you have a selection, you have a contract, you have performance management, you have team meetings, you have whatever. In cities, you have other moments of truth. You have conversations that are happening daily amongst people, and you can inform those conversations. So an example is when we got many years ago, post 9/11, where we were asked to help the city of Manhattan get ready to welcome more people. So they wanted to restore their trust, so that people, after what had happened, people feeling safe again. So we work very, very close with the people who were designing the layout of the new places and lots of parks, etc. But essentially, in terms of communication with the citizens or future citizens, we identified moments of truth where that would click, and the underlying belief was challenged, right? And therefore, very quickly, Manhattan became now a lovely place to live in again, being respectful of the site of the 9/11 incident, or attack. But actually managing to have that together with, this is a place where we relax and we think about what's important in life. So we repurpose, we create a significance for that, and now it becomes a place where people go for peace and reconnection with humanity. So it's just, when we work in the Middle East with the banking system of Lebanon, we were asked by the head of the bank, the national bank, to help reduce corruption in the financial services industry. Again, it's a very amorphous space. So it's not, you don't own what they read, what they do, performance management. You don't own any of these moments of truth. But nevertheless, you find when you hang out there and you understand that there are nevertheless moments of truth that you can still work through, and the change happens very, very quickly. So in the city of Buenos Aires, where the objective was to help change the mindset of 3 million people who didn't have a clue or an interest in separating residues at source, the wet rubbish from the driver, the recycling. So they didn't want to do it. We understood that had a mindset that rubbish actually belonged to the government because they pay their taxes for collection. So psychologically, it wasn't theirs. That was number one. And number two that we realized was that rubbish disappeared. It goes away. So because out of sight, out of mind, and because a lot of people live in buildings, and buildings had incinerators. So you literally threw the bag through a hole on the 6th floor. The hole disappeared out of your house. You could smell a bit, but that was it. You close that lid and off you go, right? Without connecting that actually then you were breathing that toxic air for having to incinerate rubbish, right? So we got the city of Buenos Aires to win the C40 Awards, which is an award for the 40 biggest cities in the world. They won a few years ago. They won the award for the one who changed the culture of recycling, the behaviors of 3 million people, going from about 12% of people separating at source to over 90 in just about 2 years. So now the city is clean. People entirely forgot about how it was. And that's what culture does, right? You move yourself with the bar to the new place, and you don't keep the gap. You normalize again, which it's excellent, because that allows you to not move down and not lose the culture that you've created. So I could speak for hours, because we got
so many examples, I'm sure. Yeah, that is amazing, 90%. And I know we could speak for hours. I've got a couple more questions that hopefully you have time for. First of all, it's clear why you don't have too much time to speak and to go to conferences and events as a speaker, because you're actually there doing the work. You're actually changing those cultures. On those rare occasions where you are able to speak and where a client manages to book you, what are you able to cover in 60 or 90 minutes that can help that audience?
I love speaking. Don't take me wrong. I love, and I've been sharing the work we do for years and years and years, online, live. So I worked with hundreds of very well-known brands as a speaker. But I always say, although I sound like a motivation speaker, then they'll have fun, and there's lots of examples, and it will, they'll have a good time. I think my point in the 60 minutes or 90 minutes is not to show my own motivation or conceptualize how do people, for example, now, how do people go back to work, and whether it's hybrid or any kind of version of hybrid people are thinking about. I would challenge. Because I continuously get my hands dirty with change and real change, and although I have a background, an academic background, and I even teach I'm a visiting professor of 2 business schools, so I'm able to have PowerPoints with boxes and arrows in them. Trust me, I can do that. But I think that the point is not to over-conceptualize change. So I haven't used slides in about 20 years now. I always ask for a whiteboard or some sort of paper where I can write on, and we have a conversation in those 60 minutes, 92 hours, or sometimes a whole day, like when you do a workshop. But what people will get is clearly a challenge of, hold on, whatever we're doing might not be working as well as we thought, or what brought us here is not going to take us forward, which tends to be kind of the message. And what's going to take us forward requires a change in some of the tools in our toolbox. So they will feel re-inspired and reconnected with their roles as leaders, in that they are, for those who are discouraged already, of going around the block once again, trying the same rituals, like, let's come up with a new initiative. We have a new project, and we're going away, and we're coming up with a list of, we need a new slogan, we need a new set of values. Our values were wrong, now we have the right ones, or the pillars, or the behaviors, or the competencies, as we called them in the 90s. It's the same thing, that we keep trying to define what we want and communicate it as if this was like a linear process. They will leave feeling very refreshed, challenged definitely, but very refreshed and very hopeful that their role as leaders in 2021 it allows them to do perhaps things that we talked about. Do you remember we talked about the VUCA world only a few years ago, many years ago? We talked about Horizon 2020, the vision of 2020. Look at 2020. It couldn't have been more different from anything that we envisioned. So clearly, we need to learn as quickly as possible, and people will be learning different ways of thinking about the challenges they have today, whether it is about talent attraction, engagement, client centricity, digital transformation, use of data to make decisions, collaboration, inclusion, leadership. All these things that people talk about, and they keep measuring and giving feedback in the hope that something magically is going to happen. They'll actually they'll leave the 1 hour with the beginnings of a new toolbox. And you know how it feels when you get a new toolbox. You feel now you can't wait to get into your workshop and use them.
Brilliant. I mean, I'm feeling challenged and refreshed after our discussion. I've learned a lot. I've got pages of notes. So even from this. So listen, finally, at the time of recording here, we're just relaxing restrictions. And you talked about, how, getting people back to work. There's a bit of still trepidation here. In your opinion, what will it take to get people back to work?
Well, I love that you finished with this question. And it seems like is the kind of question I would have asked you to finish with, which I haven't, to make this flow better. But I am currently, one of the many things that I'm doing at the moment is I'm pushing very hard to campaign on don't go back to work. And and let me double click on this. Don't go back to work with the emphasis on back. I think that we need to go forward to work, not go back, because going back would mean that we haven't learned anything from this last 18 months and that we're trying to reproduce a version of what we had before. That was not working. It wasn't working. People weren't that engaged. We were not very innovative. Our services and products were getting commoditized. We were not being competitive enough. Customers weren't very happy. The NPS, people were starting to celebrate having an NPS, a net promoting score of 50, which is ridiculous, because I wouldn't like to run a business where half of my clients wouldn't recommend me. It's like I wouldn't run a family where half of my children don't want to be here. I mean, it wouldn't work. So we it wasn't working. Engagement was low, innovation was low, productivity was low, despite of all the technology, all the massive investments, the books written on leadership, the on tap TED Talks and free for all, university courses on leadership and culture and management and all that stuff. So it is time to stop and saying, hold on, guys, we don't want to go back to work. Let's use this opportunity to go forward to work. And going forward to work means that we have to rethink not just where people work from or how they work from, but actually why people work. We can't keep having work as the thing that we do in exchange of money, so then we can have a life, kind of fighting this work-life balance. That is gone. That should be gone. And if we don't get it very quickly, it's going to take over us. The millennials are going to come and shake the hell out of us. The reason why we work needs to become the first conversation in leadership teams all around the world. The how, where from, that's secondary. Of course, you still have to have the conversation about, is it virtual? How many days a week are we going back to the office? Or that whole conversation, please put it down one level and put one up above those, which is about, okay, hold on, why are we working? Why are we working? How can we make work for us? How can we make work defines us? Historically, work was the thing that we did with our time, in our lives, that defined who we were. There's lots of last names that actually are based on the professions of our ancestors, Baker or whatever it was. There's streets with the names of the workers, the professional, the person who used to work there, or the type of people who worked in that neighborhood. And therefore, how do we become again a society where work and life no longer they have to fight for each other, and we realize that life is so much bigger and it needs to encompass work, and work is the thing that we're supposed to do to have a life. Is what fills us with enthusiasm, that gives us purpose. It gives us a reason for being, because there's a limit to how much golf you can play. I've worked with loads of senior executives and ministers and presidents of countries who got it all. They got it all. They got the power, they got the career, they got the money, and they are in their 50s or 60s, and they tell me, I want to give something back. I'm thinking, why? What did you do with your whole life that you have to give something back? What have you taken that wasn't yours? So the giving has to be part of everything that we do. And you won't get the need to actually go and do, to have a corporate social responsibility unit so that you can say that you're doing something useful. How about we reinvent our work and we make money out of creating value at scale? What if, we do, and I'm not talking, again, this is not tree hugging. This is about using our talents and our opportunities through our work to be very proud of of the value that we're creating for society. So therefore, don't go back to work. Let's go forward to work.
Lovely. Javier, you have given so much today in this podcast. You have given so much value. Thank you so much for being my guest.
My pleasure. It's a real treat to work with you.
Thank you. So thank you for listening to The Speaker Show. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on Apple Podcasts. And you can keep up with future episodes on the Speakers Associates website, which is speakersassociates.com, or your favourite podcast app. And if you need Javier's help in your organisation, be sure to contact Speakers Associates in time to book him for your next event. See you next week, and bye-bye for now. Thank you.